Yes, thank you everybody for coming today. My name is Thomas James. I'm the guest curator here at Notre Dame of Maryland University. And I want to welcome you all to Material Thinking, a creative symposium at the Gormley Gallery. And right now, you all are at our curatorial panel. And this panel in particular brings together 3 Baltimore-based curators to discuss the evolving nature of curatorial practice. And together in this conversation, we will investigate the role curating has played in shaping contemporary art discourse and how it can serve as a tool for social justice, as well as exploring the significant impact material-driven art practice has had on exhibition making. Well, we have Quentin Gibeau. He's I asked about his name earlier, that's why. Last name. He's a curator, artist, and musician and writer from the Kentucky side of the Ohio River Valley. Currently living in Baltimore, Maryland, Quentin has worked in art education, exhibition programming, and their overlapping areas for more than a decade now. And he specializes in quintessential work as a visual medium in homage to learning how to read with the help of comics and New Yorker cartoons. He's also drawn to creating artistic experiences that are accessible. So next we have the incredible Vassor, who also was the assistant curator for this exhibition here. So Kai's a mixed media illustrator, educator, curator, and muralist based in Baltimore. Their work focuses on preservation, healing, and interpersonal communal trauma, and amplifying collective needs through research. In 2023, Kai earned an MFA in Community Arts from Maryland Institute College of Art with an accompanying college-level arts teaching certification. And then here to on the laptop, we have Liz Faust. And she's there because she's feeling a bit under the weather today for the next few days. So Liz is an art historian, independent curator, and a professor of contemporary art whose career is centered around weaving diverse narratives and transforming art spaces globally. She has curated over 80 exhibitions, ranging from solo exhibitions of living and deceased artists and group shows. From 2018 to the present, she's taught at a number of academic institutions, including MICA, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and the University of Cincinnati. And her courses focus on hands-on exhibition making with extra emphasis on disability and accessibility, interdisciplinary curatorial models, museum studies, postmodernism, and contemporary Japanese art. She holds an MFA in curatorial practice from MICA and a BA in general history, art history, and museum studies from Juniata College in Huntington, PA. All right, I'm always glad to get through those intros. Just so
yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's great because I'm always impressed with the accomplishments of everybody. And so, again, that's why I'm really happy that we're having this panel. I think it's everyone knows it's quite remarkable. All right, so my first question that I want to ask is around describing curatorial practice. And so in recent history, there's been an expansion of what we think about when it comes to curating and being a curator. And one definition that I found in probably one of the more widely read books, the Curator's Handbook, is that curator is best known as the researcher, selector, interpreter of works of art in an exhibition. And this definition speaks to more of curating as a verb, as I like to call it. And when I think about curating, I think more about curatorial practice and approach and methodology and whatnot. So some words that come to my mind when I think about curatorial practice are things like caretaking, accessibility, self-critique, things like that. And so I just want to kind of start the panel by asking you all, are there any particular words that come to your mind when you think about curatorial practice and maybe how it relates to your practice? And anyone can start.
I mean, my first initial reaction is listening to how curating is about translating. I would say it actually, that is centered on the exhibition as the mode of contemporary art instead of also considering the additional critical engagement between art, space, audience, and context. And so, for my practice, a lot of my personal stuff focuses on bridging conflicts, excavating histories, and facilitating conversations. So to me, that's also integral to the curatorial practice.
I can respond or attempt to. I think if I'm going to talk about the way I've been a curator, I think a lot of my approach has been either being an editor or a promoter of specific ideas that the artists are talking about. And a lot of that comes from how I worked as an artist, and especially as a mural artist. The mural that I did at Club at Collington Square, I solicited a lot of community input and had a lot of the residents of the neighborhood and my students basically come up with different kinds of drawings of the different concepts we were doing, and then we came up with a bunch of different versions and had residents in the neighborhood vote on the design. So that's like one example of how I've gone into curating, is using that idea and framework of trying to figure out what the common thread or the common experience that all the artists in the show were having, and trying to put that one forward. But some of those, it's like, it can be more intentional, like with the Baltimore to Palestine show last year. It was really trying to create a humanizing experience for the Palestinian, for the viewer of the Palestinian experience, specifically told through the art that the family, the Kamis family who I was working with, are all artists. And they were all approaching that identity and conflict from like a completely different lens. And for people over here who have, most of us have like no touching point with that conflict, being immersed in a whole different family process, taken differently. It was something that I was trying to get the audience to walk away with, to empathize, put themselves in their shoes. So.
And similarly for me, I look at my practice, my curatorial practice, as a community practice, right? So whether that be bridging communities within Baltimore, because there are so many communities here that honestly are separate from one another. There's a separatism and segregation to an extent. So bridging that gap, even bridging those gaps to other communities outside of here as well. Something we often say at the gallery is that a lot of the art that we bring in, no matter who's presenting, is meant to validate everyone's human experience. So whether that be through further research and assisting artists and understanding more parts of themselves and their own experiences, or even the experiences of their community members, I feel like we kind of help contextualize or bring that out more through curatorial practice, or at least through my own practice. Most recently, that has looked like assisting in presenting a solo exhibition with folks like Devin Allen even. Where a lot of people have predominantly seen a lot of his protest imagery, but they haven't really seen the fact that his imagery of everyday Black folks, the mundanities maybe, is also a form of activism, right? And also a form of community upliftment. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, one thing that I find interesting when I explain kind of what I do to other folks, when I talk about my curatorial practice, talk about my cultural work and other things that I'm doing, I always find it interesting the ways in which I find myself explaining it, in metaphor or whatever. So I wanted to know from you all and kind of the if you all have had a similar experience in which the way that you may have to explain the kind of work that you do to be, have you ever found that to be limiting, or there's no way to always to be able to give folks the full picture of kind of what you do and all the invisible work that goes into it, but yeah, but have when it comes to explaining what you do, I guess how have you been able to to do that in a way that you feel may encompass, all the work they do, especially thinking now about how curatorial practice can be a bit fluid. Yeah. I mean, I think especially for folks like yourself, like it's all part of it.
Honestly, I view all of my practices, the multi-hyphenates that some of y'all heard earlier. I always tell folks that I don't take on a new hyphenate unless it feeds into the other. So for me, curating feeds me also being an educator and a professor. It doesn't necessarily just mean me being a professor or educator walking into major institutions either. It's also me when I show up to local libraries or to talk to young people, right? I think that having that background in curatorial practice allows me to kind of talk to young people, especially about there just being different avenues in the arts, because most people are kind of taught that with the arts you can only be the artist. They don't really tell you what it takes to support an artist and get them to the point of proliferating or being well known to the public, and that there are many other facets even within that. So also being an artist and kind of being able to talk to them and other folks about that as well, I think everything for me at least feeds into one another.
I think with some of the work I've done, like the first show I curated, the Brick House art that place doesn't exist anymore. It's like my friends attempted doing a studio warehouse situation. But we had another friend who really wanted, he had just recently kind of been released from being incarcerated, and he had this idea of like wanting to do a show kind of about sort of the politics that radicalized him when he was incarcerated. And just the thing, he had a lot of time to think about stuff. So he and I kind of co-curated, but basically like, it was just like a group of friends being like, hey, you know how to do art stuff. And they had me do that. So, but then that ended up translating into, with my role at Gallery CA, I'm like the senior community coordinator in addition to the gallery manager, so I work one-on-one with all of the residents. So when I'm curating a show there that is especially one of our resident shows, the work that I'm doing with that resident is like basically trying to stimulate professional development for them as an artist. So with the residents I'm working with directly, I will take that approach, but if it's, and I've been doing that for so long that when I actually had my show here at Gormley, I realized I had no idea like what I believed as a curator. Because I didn't do the curatorial practice program, like Kai and I are similar, that we both kind of came through it through the community art program. So it took a minute to sort of figure out, like, it's like, am I thinking about this as an editor? Because a lot of the way that I try to do it is like somewhat service-oriented, so yeah, it's a bit of a, I would say, yeah, it's service-oriented with me.
Yeah, that's a big, whenever I try to explain to people what I do, I'd often just say I make exhibitions and leave it at that, because to be fair, and to be clear, I'm not an artist. I've never, I was never a maker. I started as a regular history historian before I came to, and then, went to MICA, studied under the amazing George Bissell, and learned a lot of hands-on community engagement and a lot of other lessons right after the Freddie Gray riot, which was also an excellent education. And my creative practice, my curatorial practice is not, I would say, a stream or river, but it's a whole pool. From the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep, it's completely all consuming, which is, perhaps not the healthiest of things, as you can see from my current state. And also the speed at which I work. I'm putting on average between 10 to 20 exhibitions a year, which means I'm now at a state at Goucher College, where I'm planning 3 years ahead of time, which is nice. So when trying to explain to people just just that aspect of it, let alone, you know, the community, the relationship, the caretaking, having artists call with life crises or calling because, you know, they need to tell you some personal stuff about their family that's going to affect their work, or having walls fall down, and then having to go to Home Depot and get some plywood and put up some new spaces. You know, a lot of the invisible work we do is so ingrained in from meals, meetings over meals, communicating, connecting with people, supporting people, having artist galleries and other spaces call you and ask for favors. So it's kind of hard. How do you convey that is your entire life and your way of being? It makes it really impossible. So it goes, I put up art on walls. That's normally the short and long of it.
Yeah, I love hearing about, and this is actually a perfect segue into the next question, how each of you all are viewing things extremely differently, very differently. And my next question is actually a bit more, quantifiable in, you know, I want to talk about methodology. And I was recently reading a paper by it was a curator named Lindsay Person at the University of South Florida, and based on some of the work she outlined a 7-step methodology for exhibition curating, and these are the 7 steps that she outlined. So 1, collecting images. 2, researching and analyzing stories and commentary on works. 3, thematic conceptualization of ideas for the exhibition. 4, select specific images that represent different themes. 5, conceptualize images using existing discourse. 6, strategically arrange in order to represent ideas. And 7, interpret images in order to tell a story, respond to questions, and pose questions. And although this was mainly focused on museum exhibition curation, I wanted to use it as a segue to kind of ask you all to ask you all, are there any of these steps in particular that you identify with, but also what are some steps that you all might take in particular?
I think I definitely resonated with the last couple because with the late bear show that I did here, I was really trying to get folks to think about what collective complex trauma would do to us culturally in terms of creating an intentional community in like positive and negative ways. That was like the main thing I was trying to say. I don't know if I got through, but I was trying to, because most of the work was sort of reflecting living through the feeling of apocalypse. So a lot of different artists took different approaches with that. So I was trying to get that question out there for the viewer, and it was interesting how all the different artists approached it differently. Because a lot of people were doing like ecological stuff, but I was trying to go at it from more of a cultural viewpoint. But yeah, that's definitely the last one. I mean, I'm way less of an academic curator than this person, so I feel like I should probably implement some of the other steps too.
Honestly, I think that some of the steps I very much relate to, and even some of what Liz just said in terms of planning 3 years in advance, I heavily relate to. I always say, you know, exhibitions are almost like planning for a future that you might not be there for. But the one thing that I feel like was missing from that list, and maybe it's because I work inside of the gallery but also do independent curating outside of it, is the selection of space. Especially thinking about, I think a lot of people immediately think curators only exhibit or create exhibitions for institutions, but also thinking about the fact that I've pitched exhibitions for public libraries, I've pitched exhibitions for high schools, etc., kind of bringing art to the public instead of them having to go to these spaces.
I would agree with all previous statements, but I think the biggest thing that's not being talked about in the list is the exclusion aspect. My curatorial kind of ethos is focused on the fact that curating as a verb is the act of inclusion and exclusion. And curators often, especially newer curators, often ignore or don't consider too deeply why they exclude stuff. And so I'm interested in why things have been excluded, why your initial gut reaction may be, oh, I don't like this, I don't want to include this. So for me, in my practice, that element is just as important of, instead of just gathering images, also looking at images that you don't want and why you don't want them is just as important.
Yeah, and interesting, when I was reading over these steps, something that I thought about in my practice was the community cultivating aspect. So, there are studio visits and things like that, especially when working with contemporary artists, but a lot of times when I have ideas for shows and things like that, a lot of times I will, part of my process is bringing it to people who, I just want to talk to about it. Like, what do you think about this? Or, et cetera. Do you have any suggestions on things I can use to reach, whatever? But reaching out to my community and folks that I think would, who's not only whose opinion I want, but also folks that I think would connect with the show and also be able to, because if my community if folks that are in my immediate community can connect with the show, they're going to bring other people, who also might be interested in it. So that's another thing that I might add to that list as well, which is just being able to talk to your peers and community members about what you're thinking about. So my next question is around curating mixed media works, which I know all of us have a lot of experience doing. So there are a lot of blurred lines between art and real life when it comes to the utilization of assemblage and other mixed media works. And material choice becomes a huge factor and a point of emphasis. And I think, especially in works like this, they're able to really reinterpret and recontextualize a lot of these objects and things of that nature. So, my question, and Kai, I'd like you to start because you also create mixed media works. So my question is, can you all talk about showcasing mixed media works and how has showing that medium in particular been important in your curatorial practice?
Absolutely. So the biggest thing that I think immediately comes to the forefront that we've all referenced in some way or another is accessibility, especially since more artists are coming off of the wall completely with their mixed media works, whether it be creating mixed media paintings that are one chairs, even similar to Tom Miller from several decades ago. So for me, even that's kind of why I brought up space being such an important thing to me as a curator. Accessibility of space, whether that be, do they charge at the door for people to come in? How often are they open, etc. That was especially important when I was on the curatorial committee at a place like UB Blake even, right? Where we received several mixed media and assemblage works. So making sure that most of them were, whether it be wheelchair accessible, whether it be accessible to someone that was 5 or somebody that was coming to church on Sundays there. So to me that it comes past like the exhibition text even at times, right? It's how we're laying out the show, right? So it's kind of really changed the way that I even hang shows at this point, depending on who's showing.
Yeah, I was just thinking because I'd actually never thought about that, but I think the approach that I'm taking usually when I'm doing a show that has different kind of mixed media is thinking about how the flow works between the artists, so that each piece kind of has enough room to shine. And if you're doing that in a different place that's like not a white wall gallery, like when we were in Area 405, I had to figure out how to make sculpture make sense, like small, delicate sculpture make sense in a dark warehouse, where there's a bunch of machine stuff like still embedded in the walls. So that's usually how I'm thinking about it, is in terms of the flow. But I mean, it's also like when we were asking that question, I was thinking about one of the first mixed media artists that made me kind of fall into the art thing, like Faith Ringgold and also Lee Bontekoe were like two vastly different things, but like Lee Bontekoe's work is mixed media in a way that you're not even thinking about, because she's using so many different weird things and it's like scary. And Faith Ringgold is also doing it in a way you're not thinking about, but just because it's so delicate. So anytime you would have art on either spectrum that is mixed media, figuring out how that works, especially in a group show with other pieces.
Okay, so my experience and kind of my philosophy around mixed media comes from my running a commercial art gallery for 4 years in Baltimore. And what I realized in that very white space is that people would come in and expect paintings, images of photographs on the wall. And when they would encounter mixed media or even sculptural works, they would pause for a bit and they would spend more time with them. So for me, I see mixed media as the challenge to the neutrality of the traditional the white cube space, by bringing what I call the textures of the real world. So, found objects, personal artifacts, film or video documentation that kind of tie art to the lived experience, because I'm really interested in audiences that aren't art audiences. So for example, I'm a first generation college student, graduate in my family, very blue collar family. They know nothing, they don't understand what I tell them about what I do at all. And so when I am putting together shows and thinking about how they're being presented, I'm thinking about how folks who would be very uncomfortable traditionally in an art gallery would come in. And actually in my gallery, we had a lot of non-gallery people come in, especially, we were in Mount Vernon, so we had a large number of, the homeless population who would come in and I would just sit and chat with it. We had a large percentage of people who visited us, kind of the people who would just kind of be in the public space frequently. And we would just talk about everything. And so I'm really interested in nurturing and kind of having those conversations because, are they going to buy a work of art? Probably not. But who knows, several individuals came to, personal realizations at the time. Do I know if that had a greater impact on my life? No. But, being in that space and making that connection in that moment was not with the paintings, but with the mixed media works. That was often the more powerful, especially for non-art folks. So that's what I'm really interested in tapping into.
Yeah, the one thing about a lot of mixed media works are, a lot of them can use, like I was saying, like using recognizable, everyday objects or recognizable images, but it's also, in a lot of ways, it can be low barrier to entry. It's lightweight, portable, with assemblage, you pick up things from wherever, scrap yards, etc. So I think that one common theme that that I was hearing is kind of focusing around accessibility and viewer experience and viewer engagement, which I think mixed media has a very unique. It's uniquely positioned to do that, and I think again being able to see each of y'all's work, being able to do that across different shows very well. which kind of brings me to, this is going to be my last question, then we'll open it up to the audience. My question is around curation as a tool for social justice. I want to read a quote from a popular book, I think it's popular. It's called Curatorial Activism, and its author, Mira, I think is her first name, Mira Riley. She mentions in the book that curatorial activism uses a revisionist approach to curatorial work, and she writes about how the act of looking back and seeing the past from a new critical lens helps to rediscover what the canon consoles and suppresses. To me, when I read this, I think about the activist or social justice outlook that is embedded in curatorial practice, because the critical spirit a curator must possess in order to review history and all the problematic aspects that will arise when doing so. I'm going to argue that it's only natural to want to not only expose that, but to combat it with an aspect of your practice. And so even very recently, Liz, right now, I think at Goucher, is it the Soil to
Skin exhibition.
Yeah, the Soil to Skin exhibition, which is focusing on environmental justice. Kai, your recent commission at the Govins.
Govins Presbyterian.
Yeah, at Govins Presbyterian, is it? Would you consider it a mural? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. So I haven't seen it in person. I was
It's okay.
but like the mural that I was reading in the Baltimore Beat article, that the folks at the church were saying that they want to use these images as a tool to open up difficult conversations. Quentin, I think your show that you read, the Area 405 show, that you did recently. We are who we want to be. I know it's Baltimore.
We will be who we want to be.
Who we want to be. All of you all are utilizing your practice in this way to open up or to be very active in creating these impactful dialogues. So my question is really just how do you all view yourselves as curators that are trying to add to these types of conversations, this type of discourse, or even taking it the next step, which is a call to action or something like that. How are you all viewing yourselves in your practice in that way, or do you view it in that way?
I definitely view it that way. I think the show you just mentioned, We Will Be Who We Want to Be, basically that kind of came out of a feeling of helplessness, because so much of what the American public, everybody who was outside of Palestine was experiencing, was that feeling of a sense of helplessness. So I was trying to figure out how were I as a cultural worker to create something that is either a moment to organize around, a way to create empathy in an audience that might not have thought about it all the way through, or any of those things, which is sort of, I think, what a lot of cultural work is aiming to do. So yeah, and then also not to harp on it again, but the MFA in community art, when that program, when I did it with George and Ken Kraftcheck, we spent a long time talking about, well, they weren't really talking about it, we were talking about agitprop and all different kinds of ways of creating experience to, like, on the flip side, create empathy. So that is definitely a way that I've approached pretty much all of my curatorial stuff, unless it's just like one of my residents who has a straight art painting show, and we're just trying to make it look good, make it look cool, which is also valid, but so it's definitely 100% of my work. And also a big part of that too is because I took this job like the month that the uprising happened, and it was my first real job ever. And I was in charge of a space that kind of came with baggage in that situation. So I really chose to think about like what I was gonna do with that. Was my face going to be on it? Whose face was going to be on it? Who was going to get room? You know. So it's definitely been a huge part of my practice.
This one's a challenging question for me because I don't know if I would personally see my practice as a form of activism for a few different reasons. The main being that I am trying to, a big part of my focus is bridging conflicts. Looking the way that I do and being the way that I was raised, right? Can do code switching and can get access into communities that normally would be opposed to a lot of, would be very right-leaning, red type of spaces. And I experienced that with my MFA thesis, The Gun Show, where we took 100 mock assault rifles with David Hess's work into both red and blue state, into the inner city kids in Baltimore at Wombworks with Mama Kay, Mama Rashida, and then took it to an actual gun show in Leesport, Pennsylvania, and basically didn't tell them if we were pro-gun or anti-gun into temperature. So, or my exhibition at Apex Art, which took third-generation Hibakusha atomic bomb victims and third generations of the scientists who built the bomb and created this space in order for them to come together about the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So a lot of what I'm interested in is bringing these two sides together to have a discourse. Not necessarily, raising awareness is definitely always an element, but it's not the only focus. It's also creating a platform, but not expecting resolution. Just the first step in that initial conversation is what I'm interested in engaging with. Now, does it always work out? Well, no, but that's part of the process, I think, for me, about resistance, repairing, remembrance is an active kind of multi-step engagement that we can do all the planning for, but getting those two sides who see themselves as opposed to each other, but often I've discovered in my work, it's often a disagreement about language. Gun violence, for example, everyone was anti-gun violence. It was just about the language both sides were using, as well as addressing, past histories and presenting evidence and mostly addressing the emotional attachment to the past that both sides have, but creating a safe space for those groups to come together. So could that be activism? Yes, but I feel that a lot of activists would disagree with me on that front because it is not as result orientated, but more process orientated.
Honestly, and especially graduating from MFACA, we learned pretty early on that you can't, or at least something that I was taught in the program, is that you can't self-attribute yourself as an activist. Is that it's kind of something that a community kind of bestows upon you after years of sacrifice, work, etc. that you've done. So I always say more than anything that I'm an advocate for artists, as as well as myself as an artist. That advocacy could look like a lot of different things. For me, a lot of the times it looks like a repatriation of power. I think a lot of the times us as art administrators have a lot of power, whether that's receiving resources from institutions, whether it be us being the first people that find out about grants or different opportunities that come up, etc. So a lot of my practice, I think, at least my curatorial practice, has been based around how do I make this a more, how do I share this power with the other people in my community? I don't want to hoard it at all, and I don't want it to go to one specific artist, but how do we all kind of lift as we climb together?
Yeah, and I also just want to make sure, so when the way that I'm viewing each of you all's practices is mainly focusing on just that, on the advocacy, on the social justice just kind of thinking about it in that you all's concerns are more rooted in social justice now, whether it's through like creating those conversations, or like or advocating for certain things, or being able to utilize the privileges that you have to be able to kind of give back to your community in what that looks like in many different ways. As far as, I mean, personally, I don't look at it's hard to place activism kind of on that, but definitely social justice and advocacy. So that's really what I'm interested in. I mean, I'm interested in a bunch of other things when it comes to those practice, but as far as the limited amount of time, the things I wanted to get to. So I really want to open it up now for anyone that is in the audience, if you have any questions for about anything that we talked about today, or anyone specifically.
You're allowed to identify how you want to, right? But I still think of curatorial practice as a creative practice. And so then one of my questions is, how do you, as a curator, with a creative or artist mind sometimes, right? How do you compromise, when it comes to, curating a show, between your interests, the institution's interests, the artist's interest, and or the audience's interest? Like, how do you compromise in that way?
That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
So real quick, one thing that it's funny that you bring that up, because something that just instantly came to my mind is kind of just around, like, my main concern is mainly around the quality of the execution. And so, like, as a curator, and again, I don't identify as an artist either, just a creative. And like, knowing that I'm responsible for all of these different things, meaning, my own vision, with whatever the implications are from the institution, and and then the artist, it's important to keep those in mind. I mean, even one of the inspirations behind this show was Notre Dame's art therapy master's program, and I was just learning about it, and I was like, okay, it inspired kind of the thought for this show. So there are those implications, but I think of a time when I remember I was working with an art space, and after we had installed the entire show, and after I'd sent the designs and everything, and then we went in and installed it, the director of the space, he called me and was like, oh, well, I think that we should have put this here, and we're gonna move this and do that. And I was just like, yeah, you can do that, but you can also take my name off of your show. Like, this is not the vision that, and so, like, I guess my answer to your question is kind of just around, like, for those considerations. As a curator, I know that I have to be compromising, but I also just create those boundaries of, like, yeah, I have to be ready at any point in time to just be like, no, this is not this portion of it once you cross that boundary, it's no longer my vision, and so I can't, I won't identify with that. But what do you want?
I'm laughing because I've done a lot of exhibitions, a lot of workshops, and a lot of different spaces. Definitely conversation and collaboration, I would say, is definitely more my mode of operation. I have hung an entire show after it's been hung because an artist was like, what do you think about this? And I'm like, let's try it. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. So I'm always up to experiment, because I'm definitely belief that, you see, believing. And that's why, like, sometimes some folks are harder to convince, and that's why, sometimes you need to rehang a whole show. So definitely, I have a lot of energy, so that allows me to do that. But also, it is kind of connecting the institutions with the artists and inviting the artists to the institutional table, so that way it's not just me talking with the institution, but I'm like, hey, these artists are part of the conversation. Let's all sit at the same table and talk about what are your hard boundaries and what are their hard boundaries, and then trying to kind of collaborate that way. So trying to get everyone in the same space and the same table is definitely a big part of it. And then also, you know, having to pull the plug if it gets, you know, if it escalates too much. I have had to do that before, to defend artists, or to, if I think an artist maybe is going a little too far, in terms of, you know, especially when it comes to like, oh, I want to have pyrotechnics. You're like, you know, there's some safety concerns here. But for the most part, I'm ready to give it a try. And all that takes is just effort and time. You know, I have some of that.
You guys have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think with my position, the way I view that question is most of the time I'm trying to keep an artist from making a bad decision, or talk them out of a bad decision, or talk them out of a decision that will completely derail the show for everyone else, especially if it's a group show. And then also, ironically, being a curator is like the part of my creative practice that I have the sort of least amount of visual bias around. But then sometimes I'm always surprised because I've like been really hesitant to hang a show that was like a resident's work, because she was showing me some things that didn't make sense. And I was like, how are you going to fill a gallery with this? And then she brought all of her work down, and then all of it together made sense together. So you can be surprised if you give people, you know, room to speak on that stuff. But a lot of it is just like trying to keep city arts from catching on fire. Or we had one resident who wanted to put one artist, who wanted to put every single painting that he had ever painted on the walls. And that was very difficult to talk about.
Right.
I appreciate everyone for stating first and foremost that you just have to have really firm boundaries as a curator, especially somebody, and it seems like all of us are welcome and open to feedback from the community, which I think to an extent, if you're constantly in conversation, not just with the artists, but also the community surrounding the place that you plan on exhibiting, right? It kind of stops that those arguments between the institution to an extent, because you can clearly advocate almost like, hey, this is what the community wants. These are the people that are going to come in through these doors. Also, you hired me.
Right.
We're on a contract. If you want to break that, there's a fee. But you know, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. So, just saying that the more open of a line of communication there is between all parties, and also when I bring up boundaries, I think one of the things I find important about saying no is, again, telling artists, hey, I myself have a limited amount of time in this space with you, unfortunately. I would love to spend to the end and beyond installing your work, but I don't. And you know, for some of us, I'm sure, especially if you've installed an exhibition by yourself, it's like, I got this one hammer and your 8 pieces. What are we going to do with this 1 hour we have? So I also just think, you know, for all of us, it's kind of a logistical, just kind of being that logistical reality for people. Like, this is what we can accomplish, or the best that we could do with what we have, you know?
Yeah, you kind of have to fight against the wedding energy that sometimes an exhibition can bring, especially if it's a solo exhibition. So.
Or the wedding itself, if there's an event that's going on
One
at your
time.
space. Great question, thank you. Do we have any more questions? We can still have a little bit more time. Brett?
Yeah, you guys mentioned that you guys use like checklists or different tools to sort of guide how you guys create a space. But once everything's sort of up, the show runs its course, what are some, with so many outcomes being abstract, what are some outcomes that you're able to identify to determine or critique like your success or like struggles with the show?
That's such a great question.
Can you repeat that for me?
Oh, sorry. So his question was around, and so correct me if I need to restate it. His question was around, with a lot of our sort of thoughts around when we are creating exhibitions, being open to experimentation and things of that nature. What are some outcomes that are how do we judge whether or not a show is a success, and or are there any outcomes that we may look for before, maybe like before, during, or after the show? Is that kind of sum it up? Okay.
Thank you.
I work at a commercial art gallery. So to be honest, we do expect to sell a certain percentage of the pieces that are on the wall. So that is an easily quantifiable thing for us. Also, during a lot of the exhibitions we have several students from various institutions, as well as higher ups of those institutions coming by for some of our exhibitions. So if I notice, hey, we had Loyola, Morgan State, we had like 5 different institutions come the last exhibition, but this one, crickets. They didn't respond to my email. It's been a couple months. They said, what's the next one? Huh? There's one up right here. So those are easy markers. Besides that, though, if it's not an exhibition that is catered towards making some form of profit off of the works that are up, such as the first major project I assisted at with the gallery was for the Banneker Douglas Tubman Museum, with an exhibition that featured over 30 African American artists from across Maryland. And with that, we knew that our markers for success were that or public engagement. So we had several youth as well as elders in the community, not just in Annapolis, but I think folks even bust out from Baltimore to go out and see that exhibition. It's right across from the state capitol, so I think the governor also and his wife also came over. We received a citation for that exhibition from the governor. A good one though, a good one. A good one. But at the end of it, they kind of recorded how many people came in, and I think it was well over 10,000 people in the year that the exhibition was up. So those are kind of, at least for me, kind of quantifiable numbers that we can use to see, who actually engaged with it, even without us prompting them to.
I think with one part of my experience, I'm really lucky because I have a direct population that I'm trying to get into the door, and it's the residents that live in the building. And also their engagement in our community programs, because we have a lot of residents who might not come to the opening because they can look at the art sort of whenever, but they might, if I have a really interesting community program, they'll probably come to that and experience the artwork. So that's one thing, but then for like the We Will Be What We Want to Be show, luckily we had a lot of momentum with that one. There weren't people in there when there weren't events though, really, which was sort of the frustrating part because it's kind of a quiet show and I wanted people to just like sit with the artwork. But it was really during events like the opening reception, we had like 300 people, which was crazy. So that was a success, but also I kind of didn't get the outcome that I wanted, which was the viewers to sort of hang out with the work and dwell on it. So.
Yeah, I would agree with all these points, but also for my exhibitions, what's really important to me is documentation and giving that documentation to the artist who can then use it for their portfolios, the open calls, and kind of future events. Because that's kind of the conundrum exhibition that the mode of communication has. They have a short, ephemeral moment in time that you have to be right time, right place to get in front of, but with documentation, which can include, also a video audio tour, which can include 3D scans or photographs or a catalog. That documentation is what researchers, other curators, artists are going to use to help propel their careers. So for me, the exhibition isn't just kind of my research and me communicating as a curator, but it's also a platform for the artist to continue to tell their own careers. So for me, hearing, whether it's their first exhibition they've had as an artist, or the first one in 10 years, or their 50th, for me, the outcomes of the exhibitions are centered on kind of pushing and supporting the artist. I may not give them a big stipend, but I give them documentation, the proof, and give them evidence that can be used later to flush out the direction that they're going.
Yeah, all of y'all's answers have been, fantastic. And then from my perspective, I also kind of find it interesting. Sometimes what I might consider a success doesn't happen until much later down the line when the show is down and I haven't thought about it in a while, and then I might re-meet someone or something like that, and they might say, oh yeah, I came to the show and it meant XYZ, or I came to this program and it stuck with me and this type of thing, and sometimes it's that reminder that as intangible as it might be, sometimes having that reminder of like, okay, look, what we did was, not only did, hopefully, we had good attendance, or, hopefully we got to do an experimental program, or hopefully we were able to collect some tangible, data feedback or something, in written form or, in documentation and whatnot. But knowing that this thing that we created, it had a lasting effect on someone is also kind of like a very kind of, it's for me, it's one of the most rewarding ways, and I kind of find that as an area of success, that one that you also can't plan for. I think we have time for one more question. Does anyone else have a question for the group at all? And if not, that is totally fine. Let's see. Oh yeah.
So I was thinking, so how do you guys deal with accessibility besides the opening, especially in small communities?
That's a great
Accessibility
question.
to the work, that is, to the show, to the space. I know that can be challenging.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that?
Oh, he was asking about accessibility and maybe like after the opening and
That's a great question. I can go ahead and jump into that.
Yeah.
Not all my projects can achieve this, but I really am interested in creating at least digital and online accessibility with 3D scans, documentation, video and audio, and I have some plans in place for a certain institution to incorporate these things moving forward. Decisions impending. Can't say too much. But in order so that way, again, not only during the opening, but after the exhibition is down, it remains open and viewable from people further afield, and also physical and mental kind of disabilities as well. So starting to think about and integrate those elements, which I had a great mentor who is interested in that and does a great job teaching that. So integrating those ideals, but also not just in the physical disabilities, but also again inviting non-art people and making it feel welcoming and not isolating or elitist, and making them feel like they can go into those spaces and those communities and have access to them as well.
I think my answer is similar to a previous one where, like, luckily, because I work in an apartment building and I'm working down the hall, I can basically have the gallery open every day during business hours. But the main issue, and you know this, is that having someone be there on weekends when people are actually going out to see artwork is so more challenging. So that's been a thing that I've had resident volunteers for that, or we've had interns, and I've had that be one thing that they do. And then luckily with the Palestine show, we had money in the budget to actually like hire docents, and we had gallery hours that we publicized and stuff like that. But that's always been an issue, specifically because of where we're located. There's like nothing else really around City Arts anymore after All Over Street had, like the initial All Over Street ended, and nobody lives in the annex, and none of the galleries and the copycat are showing publicly anymore. So that's one way around it. It's just been sort of trying to find time when people are actually available to do it, but then also similar to what Liz was talking about, where I've been working on revamping our website so that it has thorough documentation of the 78 shows that we've done in the past 10 years. So,
I very much empathize with what both of the panelists said before, especially surrounding, for instance, if we're talking about in a non-physical way, creating a catalog. I've had to do several for the gallery. They're usually hundreds of pages, and I'm kind of like the only person on our marketing and design team. So that includes like taking photos, all that other stuff, and researching the artists. But I find that that's helpful because I also collaborate with a lot of professors across Baltimore, one of them being in the back right now, Linnea, I see you. I collaborate with a lot of professors across Baltimore to have their students come into the gallery during our gallery hours as a part of like their homework assignments even, as a way to kind of make things feel more accessible to folks that maybe otherwise wouldn't have interacted with our space before. Another thing is, because of where our gallery, specifically talking about Gallery Matisse is based, we're right off of Charles Street, we're right on Charles Street. So there's a lot of traffic, right? There's a lot of transient folks kind of in the area, as well as it's a pretty tight-knit community. So we have folks that maybe live a couple blocks up. We maybe have folks that are dealing with finding a home that come in, but they're all treated the same. As long as they come in during gallery hours, I'll always come out and say, hey, how you doing? This is the exhibition that's up. What do you think about, I always say, what piece are you the most drawn to every single person that walks in, whether they're 5 to 85, you know? So small things like that, I think in a non-tangible way, help bring accessibility through a space. I also think in a tangible way, if we're going back to just how exhibitions are hung, making sure that they're hung in a way that folks from different accessibility levels can actually view and enjoy and really take in the work. I've especially had to consider that this year because one of my students for Mafaka is a wheelchair user. In a lot of his work this year, we've decided to have a lot of the students' work hang between 5 and 6 inches lower than it normally would, so that folks can kind of view things from his vantage point, as well as so that he can enjoy the work himself more. So just different things like that, I think, make a huge difference.
And I think the last thing that I would also add is that once the show, when you know that a show is coming, you do all of your marketing and whatnot, but especially once the show is up and the initial hoopla is has kind of died down, and normally hopefully as a curator you can get a couple of days rest and then kind of get back at it, which doesn't always happen. I think, and kind of one thing that you spoke about earlier, Kai, was kind of bringing folks from different organizations and whatnot through, that during the times that are when it's quiet, if you will, that's kind of when a lot of that other work could start, but is put in motion. Where like for me, like that's when even though I might have done a general email to a bunch of people, when I know it's going to be quiet, that might be when I'm reaching out to different organizations, say, hey, you should bring your kids or your teens or your students or whoever here then, or your affinity groups, etc. And I'll make sure that I'm there for that. Or even like one-on-ones when you might have friends or even just other people in the community or in your art sphere or wherever that you might think might want to come to the show. You reach out to them one-on-one and say, hey, I'm gonna, I'd like to show the show, I'll be here, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of like Another kind of thing just about accessibility is kind of about that you kind of have to become a more direct hand-to-hand promoter of the show, if you will, to try and get as many people in as possible. And especially like sometimes like spaces like this, like the hours aren't always super accessible to everybody. Like sometimes if the hours are Monday through Friday 9 to 5, it's just like a lot of people aren't going to be able to come see the show. So you have to kind of figure out ways around that, and sometimes that is making yourself available as well for those one-on-one kind of interaction. Yeah, great question. And with that, I think we did it. So I want to thank all of you all for coming to our panel conversation.